I think we can probably go ahead and get started. I think there are still people joining. Thank you for joining us today for part three of Building Narrative Power. This is the third webinar in the series that we've been doing. And I think we can go ahead and get started with our opening go around. I think we have a small enough group that folks can come off of mute if you'd like to, or you can put your response in the chat. And we're just asking you to share your name, your pronouns, your organization, your location, and if you can think of an example of a narrative shift that has brought about a policy change, it could be one that you've seen in your work, or one that you've just witnessed happen, you know, in the media or in general. So I can get started. My name is Natalie from the Dignity in Schools campaign. My pronouns are she, her. I'm based in New York City. And an example of a narrative shift that I was thinking of is like the creation of the concept of getting rid of student loan debt. I think that was an issue that was impacting a lot of people, but it wasn't thought of as something that could have a collective solution, I think, for a long time. And little by little, I feel like people were able to explain why, the huge amount of student loan debt that people had was really having a negative impact, beyond just the individual. So I feel like people now like really understand that as an issue and didn't really see that, maybe even 10 years ago. So that's my example. Somebody else, do you want to come off mute and give your opening name, pronoun, org, location, and an example of a narrative shift?
Liz Smith, Statewide Education Organizing Committee, uh, pronouns she, her, um, location New Jersey, Central Jersey. And I would say that one of the narrative shifts or it's in the process, that the federal government can choose whether to um, provide funds for education for the states.
Great example. Thank you. Someone else want to jump in?
Roland Winston, Virginia Council on LGBTQ, Richmond, Virginia, he, him pronouns. As probably all of you know, we had a gubernatorial election that resulted in a shift from conservatives to liberals, and the new governor has terminated the any state entities working with ICE program and encouraged localities the same and appointed someone to the Virginia DOE, Secretary of DOE, that will be reflexive and responsive to what we really need to happen. So that's all underway, so to speak.
I can jump in. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Kim. That was you coming off.
No, it was Betty, but you can go on and I go after you.
Okay.
All three of us. I love it.
All right. Sorry about that. Ingrid, she, her pronouns from the Public Justice Center in Baltimore. One thing I think that has caused a lot of policy shifts is narratives around like brain development of young people and kind of like neuroplasticity, and not that it's not problematic in a lot of ways, but that's led to policy change around things like juvenile life without parole laws and things like that. Although there's still like these cyclical backslides around like racialized and racist narratives around like predator kids and things like that. So that's, I don't know, one that I thought of. And I will pass it to Betty or Kim.
Good afternoon, everyone. Betty Petty, she, her, hers. Sunflower County Parents and Students United from Mississippi. And I would think that one of the shifts that I would actually do is the one that Mrs. Smith actually stated about and we call it in our area, it's basically to the point that they are basically trying in the education system, basically putting more money, want uh private schools to get the money that public schools get, but then they are not held accountable like the public schools are held accountable about the funds in which they actually received. And Miss Kenya,
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon. Kim Irby in North Carolina here. Pronoun she, her, mama. And I think we're in the process, hopefully, of a narrative shift of getting the gavel out of the hand of our Republican-led legislator. The Republicans have challenged, actually put him in a primary because they were mad with some decisions that he made here locally. So he's losing by he lost by 2 votes in their race. That's how close it was. And they're in a recount right now. So everybody is praying um, that guy loses. And one strategy, I have to say, that those that are unaffiliated voters, they were voting with the Republicans. They chose the Republican ballot in this primary. So I hope that is a live narrative shift that I can report back.
I'll jump in here. Anel Eccleston, Student Advocacy Center in Michigan. He, him pronouns. A narrative that we've been working on. There's been a narrative that virtual education works for all students, and we are working to shift that narrative, that virtual education does not work for all students, but especially for students with disabilities.
All right. Well, thank you for those excellent examples. I'm going to pass it to Anel, who's going to review the agenda for us.
Awesome. Thanks, Natalie. And so today we're going to be going over we did a little bit of an opening here. We're going to be kind of recapping the past 2 sessions a bit for us here as well. We want to really going to dive deep into today about communicating with different audiences. How do we make sure our messaging works for those different audiences? Really specifically around tailoring those messages to make sure that we're uplifting that to cross over, and then also really tracking and measuring success. I think a lot of us can attest to narrative development and then what afterwards, right? We want to make sure we're building effective narratives that really are geared towards shifting the political narrative around our agenda items, and how do we track that, and how can we tell that we are making progress in those areas. And then with that, the different ways to approach this training, we can think about it from the sense of, with the goal of having a full narrative plan of your own at the end of this series, right? And so the idea really is that this toolkit is helpful for all of us to be able to build strong and powerful and transformative narratives, and also to prepare us to do this process within our group or organizations, really giving us a solid foundation to really be able to develop strong narratives in our campaigns and our work locally, statewide, federally, whatever that looks like for our organizations. And then really thinking about how we can add things into our existing communications work. A lot of us are maybe in mid-campaign work or building to a campaign or on the back end of some campaign work. How do we continue to make this push forward and continue to add things to our existing communication that can really bring effective policy change? And then again, like this workbook is a template and it's available as a resource for all of us as well. And that's the piece that we want to continuously bring back and hone in on, that we can be able to take this workbook and adapt it to our organization and our work here. So really diving deep, just as a reminder, right? This is our narrative work here, our narrative vision, right? We want to be able to build core messaging, allow that core messaging to really drive supportive messages, issue framing, really tailoring them to our audiences, right? We're going to kind of talk a little bit more about that today. Leaning into the priority topics, right, to illustrate our messages, really thinking about the success, right, of our messages. Who are we talking to? How are these messages becoming effective? And how are we tracking some of that success there? And then also really diving deep into building that political alignment as well. Hopefully at the end of all the series, right, we'll be at a great place for us to be able to really spearhead in our organizations and our work to build strong and great deliverable messages. And so after the past few sessions, right, would anybody be willing to share their drafts of their core message, or maybe any of the Easter eggs that we've been talking about, right? Any of those that may have came, throughout the time in between the sessions? Would anybody like to come off mute, or you can drop it in the chat? Any volunteers for sharing your draft or core messaging? So I think what I'll
Also talking about like the narratives that police keep us safe, right? Like that came up a lot recently, those kind of conversations. So that's a narrative.
Yes, yes. Police keep us safe. That
Whether it's
is.
in community or why we have a need for more SROs. You
Mhm.
know, an opponent actually said that who's running, for legislation. He says, I'm running because I want a SRO in every school in North Carolina. I'm like, oh my God, here we go.
And it's interesting, Kim, because we're seeing that here in Michigan too, that districts are saying, we need SROs in our building, and they're framing it around safety, right? To keep our kids safe, keep our schools safe. We're not actually having the conversation on the other side of that coin, right? And that's what we can continue to uplift by building strong and powerful narratives. Would anyone else want to jump in here? All right. We'll keep it going. And so just a recap, narratives are a collection of related stories representing a core idea or belief, right? And so we learn that dominant narratives, right? Schools, mass media, social media, popular culture, family, and community are all necessary, right? As we're thinking about building our narratives. And then where does that fall for your organization, and your interest of building the narratives, right? And so we've been developing some easy little give me's here, right, to kind of help us to build some narratives, right? We will change the story about X so that people believe Y, right? And so we want to make sure that our narratives, at least from my perspective, as I've been engaging in building narratives with our organization, really thinking about where is the transformation in our narrative? How are we conveying that within our narrative development? And how these things, will be seen as positives for our community, right? And so really leaning into some of that kind of a language as well. you know, really hoping that we're getting the information out. And so we want to make sure that whatever our messaging is, it's going to be easier to build that while it's well known. People will regularly hear examples of these kind of narratives in a variety of ways. And so how can we continuously, make sure that our narratives are strong enough that they can stand the test of time, right? And we want to be able to make sure that our narratives can go longer, than potentially just the campaign we're trying to win. You can kind of read some more of these bullet points here, and finally I'll kind of highlight the third to last one. People will expect what, right? The transformation, the change. What are people going to expect within this narrative? And we want to be able to continuously emphasize those things as we continue to build out our narratives as well. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Natalie to kind of recap some of our core message.
Thanks, Anel. So yeah, we're just continuing the recapping because I know some of you have not been on either the first one or the second one. So we are trying to create a core message so that you always know the main thing that you're trying to communicate in terms that can connect with the widest audience. So we shared DSC's core message. Public schools are here to serve everyone. We can fully fund our schools by investing in support and care instead of punishment and police. And we shared on the last call this concept of Easter eggs, which are the words that were in blue, and I'll explain those in a second. So Easter eggs in general are something that's hidden, maybe contains a surprise. We're kind of entering that season. Also refers to when a movie or a video game or another piece of media contains some kind of hidden message that is recognizable to people who know a lot about that show or movie or video game, but may go unnoticed by others. We talked about it's similar to like a dog whistle, but it's a positive thing. And so those Easter eggs connect your core message to both your short-term campaign goals and the long-term vision, and may help you connect with new audiences. So you're trying to have a core message that isn't controversial as a bridge to help persuade people to support our more complex or polarizing ideas. And the goal is that you want to shift the meaning of the word over time to include your definition of it. And so these are each of the words that were in blue for DSC's core message. And you can see we're thinking through then what does that term actually mean to us, which may be different and is different in every case than what maybe the most common understanding of it is. And so we're working to change that definition for people to bring people in to what our meaning of that is. So for example, public schools, to us, that means community oversight and leadership. That means protecting public goods specifically. It means not supporting privatization like vouchers and unaccountable charter schools, and not supporting private companies taking over school staff roles. We use the term we really purposefully because we mean that the people control how funds are spent. It's our money. Serve everyone. It means education as a human right. We honor civil rights protections. We require quality public early education. That means no racial discrimination or any kind of identity-based bias, and no to using criminalization to deny education. We had that for each of these. We didn't have a chance to go through it last time, so I'm just going to quickly review it so you get, more of a sense of how to, have these terms contain, your longer term vision. So fully funding means yes to increasing education budgets at all levels, yes to addressing funding inequity, no to budget cuts and school closures. Support and care, that means many school staff roles to provide support and positive discipline like restorative justice, community schools, wraparound services, and no to harsh discipline and punitive responses. What we mean by punishment and police, no to police in schools, but also no to the overuse of suspensions, expulsions, arrests, nor no to corporal punishment, and no to militarization in schools. So protection from ICE and other federal agencies, technology that's also used by the military or police, requiring military tests, things like that. So just wanted to share that and give examples of how we were able to compress down into these terms what our longer term vision is to help pull people into our way of thinking, from the beginning. So just gonna pause there and see if anybody has any questions or reflections about any part of the previous sessions before we move on. We've been talking about like heroes and villains. We talked about the boy who cried wolf as an allegory that we then saw an example of that showing up. Last session, we played a long video of Mayor Mamdani in New York City, like doing a very good job of keeping to what his core message was. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and just see if anybody has any questions or reflections before we move on. And yes, I will slow down. Any questions, reflections?
Well, one reflection is kind of um, the our narrative being co-opted. And that's kind of the scary part, because we've seen that happen so frequently. It's just I guess it's just a note.
For sure. It's all a moving target all the time, this stuff, because yeah, something can take hold that you're not expecting. So like much of organizing, it's something you have to be like shifting yourself a bit. It happens all the time, for sure. Anything else anybody wants to share?
Natalie, just to kind of piggyback on Liz's comment about narratives being co-opted, when you're using some of these Easter eggs, right, and just for clarity purposes, right, how could you avoid using an Easter egg to and having that be co-opted?
I don't think there's like a one size fits all answer to that. I think it's like, it's always like a push and pull battle, I think, for these ideas. So, the definition, like I noticed a while ago, like people who are trying to dismantle public education, calling public schools government schools, um, is an example of like, yeah, safe for sure. Safe is a really big battleground. Some of these words it's just the nature of what we're doing is we're trying to get the widest number of people to agree with our definition, but I don't think you can control it. And that I think it's not part of this training, but I think maybe like if we do like a second round, like an advanced or something, we could get some examples from people who are dealing with kind of yeah, like direct co-optation, and like crisis communication because that it just happens all the time, I guess. So I think it's just you have to expect it, but that's why we're starting in this is a better way to say it. We're starting in this training from what we are trying to do. The last session is about responding to negative, narratives. And I think sometimes that's flipped. So that's why we're starting from what we're trying to do. And so we're always going to be trying to do that, I guess, is the way to put it. And yeah, being flexible and shifting where it needs to. But um, otherwise, if you're only reacting to that, you'll just kind of get lost, I think, in everything. But that's a good thought for like the next round of training, I think, is getting into that a little bit more. I don't know if anybody else has any other responses to that. All right, I'm going to pull up the slides again. Okay. Um, So I wanted to give some examples of how to shift narratives against fascism that I took from a webinar that I saw a little while ago. So Ruth just put in the chat the link to that whole presentation, and I really highly recommend it. Um, so this is a direct screenshot from there. I'm citing it and encouraging you to watch the whole thing. Um, how to build a culture of defiance to beat fascism. The presenter was named Jiggy Geronimo, and it was just really, really fantastic. So it was not specific to education, but they made a bunch of really good points that I wanted to share here. So, the first important thing that they talked about is that most of this narrative work, you're trying to move, passive opponents to neutral, neutral to passive allies to active allies. You're really not going to focus a lot of energy on trying to move your active opponents because it's very, very unlikely. What you're doing is instead is building power with that whole other group um, to make it so that your active opponents don't matter, I guess is the way to put it. Um, and so when you're thinking about the messaging, it's more of like moving people along a spectrum. And focusing on that because sometimes a lot of this is longer term work. And so the examples that they were giving, and we're going to do an exercise on this in a little while in groups. They start from, okay, if we are going to defeat fascism, on a large scale in the United States, what do people need to think and believe to build up what that culture is? So they have a bunch of things here. These are like the core things that to make that happen, what do people need to believe? So there's a long list here. That it's happening. We are living under authoritarianism, that it affects them, that, the elite are supporting it, that it's cowardly to not fight, that everyone around them is disrupting, that they're a part of a resistance, that's fun, and that we will win. Um, so that's their example in this presentation of what people need to think and believe to, defeat fascism. Maybe, if you're starting from the passive opposition, trying to shift them to neutral, maybe they shift a little bit on one of these points, but it's still enough to kind of, change them from actively, opposing you. And so they connect that then to what does that mean for content? So it's like whatever we're doing out there, things we're writing, is it social media when we're speaking? Just all the different ways that we communicate messages lead back to shifting those beliefs. So if we want people to believe that it is authoritarianism, then we have to share a lot of stories that like have proof of that, and there is a day-to-day impact, that it impacts people, the person that's reading it, show how corporations are supporting it, and using that humor and mockery is in their example, really helps, and that there is a resistance and that people want to be a part of it. So I just wanted to share that as an example of something like really direct, like they're naming what they're trying to change about people's beliefs and how to actually, what are the things that will actually do that, that lead that come out from that. So just pausing to see if there are any questions on that piece. We are going to do a breakout on this that's more specific to our work. So we'll get to play with that a little bit more. Any questions before we move to the next thing? And we pause for questions throughout, so you'll have time. I'm going to pass it back to Anel to talk about different audiences.
Yes. And so this here is going to be an opportunity for us not just to really like hear about switching narratives for different audiences, but then we'll get a little bit of a practice time as well. And so, uh, which audiences will we develop arguments and messaging for specifically for? And so it's important for us to really think and understand, what to say and like where to say it, right? I think a lot of times we can kind of get into that moment where we can really feel like we have to defend deeply our narrative, right? And our stance, right? And so understanding who we're talking to, who our audience is, what to say and where to say it and how to say it, can continue to strengthen our messaging, can continue to strengthen our narrative, and then also be able to, um, hopefully pull people into understanding, our agenda and our perspective. The reality is, none of our organizations have the time to talk to every single person, right, that we want to talk to. It's challenging for us to sometimes get to the ones we do want to talk to, right? But it's also very important, again, to go back to our point above, right? Who are we talking to? What do we want to say, and like where to say it? Really understanding that aspect, and continuing to push to send messages to everybody without having some kind of follow-up or directing them to get back to us in some kind of a way or get activated in some kind of way isn't going to be very effective. Thinking about choosing our key audience as a type of power analysis. I'm a firm believer in engaging in deep power analysis, to be able to really allow us to see who we really need to pinpoint, and so that way we're not trying to talk to this person to connect us to that person and to that person, right? Really thinking about who we can help, who we can reach out to with our goals, how we can reach our goals, and who might block us and all of that. That part of blocking is really important for us to continue to understand as we are prioritizing the audiences where our efforts can make the most and the best impact. So choosing our priority audiences, right? And so um, making sure that if we are going to continue to reinforce our position, which we are all, working really hard to do, right, is making sure that we're developing strong arguments to those potential opposers, right? Thinking about that as far as values, right? What matters most to them. We just attended a board meeting recently where we spoke very close to the district's strategic plan and their values around equity, right? And so we were making sure that's what we were conveying and also bringing along some of our families to be able to support that narrative push at that board level as well. What are the current beliefs of those audiences, right? What do they already think about this issue? How do we kind of push and move away from their misconceptions, also acknowledging that those exist, right? And so really thinking from that particular area, involving that when you're really looking at values and their concerns, right? What else are their current beliefs? And then who are those trusted sources, right? Who are those influences that influence their opinion? Who are those people, right? And how do we work with the allies we have in those spaces to really help and not just have stake in our narrative, but to be able to push our narrative forward as well, right? And so as much as possible, encourage answers to come from real experiences or research, right? Not assumptions or stereotypes. Making sure that we're rooted in facts, making sure that we're rooted in the realness of our messages and moving forward there too. So our key audiences, right, as DSC, right, policymakers, lawmakers, we are all aware of that, administrators, right, people that are in school boards, budgets, CFOs, financial districts of staff as we're continuing to push for equitable funding, teachers, parents, youth, those are very core to our work. We have to be able to continue to work and gather, and mobilize those folks as well, right? Faith communities, media, especially public media, right? We know media is a big driver of narratives, messaging. How can we find allies in that space as well? And then finally thinking about potential funders, donors, and general supporters, public supporters. Always good to really consider building some narratives around that too. And so we're gonna talk a little bit more about our breakout session. And so Natalie will give us some instructions there.
Yes, thank you, Anel. I think Ruth is putting in the chat the worksheet that you're going to do in your breakouts. I'm going to open them in a second, We are going to break out by region, just and so you'll have to select your own. And the interpreters will be in the main room, which is where the Midwest people should be. So if you need interpretation or you're in the Midwest, don't select a breakout room. Everyone else select the breakout room related to your region. I will open them in a second, but just wanted to, yeah, tease that. So we do have a worksheet. I actually made some edits since I made this slide, but basically you're going to want to think of some examples of that process that, from that other presentation where you think about what you want. In that example, it was like, fighting, getting more people to fight against fascism. And the example that I have here is your audience could be an individual or like a group of people. What you want from them in this example, it was, you want them to allow your group to come in and do restorative justice programming during the after school program. So in order to make that happen, what narrative shift is needed? What would they need to believe or understand to give you what you want? So we have some examples here, like that there would be a benefit that our organization is trusted to provide that type of service, that parents and caregivers will see the addition as a positive. And then you'll name some ways that you can deliver the message. So what Anel was just going over, like who are they influenced by, what kinds of information, stories, etc., will help you make that case directly to them. And I have some examples there that you can take a look at. And I just want to remind you again of this chart too. So whoever you choose as your example, I mean, I think there's at least two slots if you want to do more than one. You're just trying to move them over one, degree, whoever you're picking. And that the core message, if you have thought about that a little bit from the previous session, if you do have one, if you don't, that's fine. But if you do have one, because we're designing it to appeal to the like widest group of people possible, it should kind of work for all of those people, at least to start with. So that's just a reminder. Who's gonna
Well, I think some of the things that I put in here, just to kind of give an example, is like the organizing goal. What do you want from this group or person? We really want decision makers to create and publish guidance uh, for schools on how to transition students into a virtual program with efficacy and honoring the students' needs is the goal. What do they need to believe or understand to give uh, for the narrative shift? I feel like one of the things is not all students understand how to work technology, regardless of their savviness and devices. Not all parents are able to support their children at home with virtual learning. Um, and that students with disabilities need to have access to accommodations within virtual curriculums. And then to deliver that message, we want to make sure that we are getting information from our uh, students and their families, right? And so just really trying to focus on the stories from them that are from students and families that are having issues here. And so what do those look like? How do we, making sure we use that to deliver the message? We want to be able to research impacts of virtual programs. And so that's something else that we are looking for to deliver the message. And then continuing to develop influences to support the change needed for virtual transitions. So just an example of how to kind of use this doc and complete it through, and how that can also help you kind of develop your own narrative power too.
All right, and I think Anel, this was your section. Am I right about that?
Yeah. We got a lot of folks back. Um, so just to get some report backs from our breakouts, could we just get like one person from each room to kind of come off mute and share with us a little bit about some of their conversation. There's some guiding questions here for you as well. Did you get any ideas from other responses, right? Do you think if you were able to do all the things you listed in there, delivering the message, right, would it be successful? And do you have access to the content that you need to be able to persuade? Do we have someone from our South group jump in here?
I was hoping Katrina would jump in. We were discussing like mental health impact, um, and students being our target group, that are impacted by not having the necessary skills that they need to address their own personal mental health. And then looking at the larger picture that even the impact from their neighborhoods, their family home, it comes to the school, and then teachers really not being trained enough to deal with all of the impact of anxiety, panic attacks, but things that are barriers to students actually learning, right, in that learning environment. So we came up with the fact that it's definitely a community. Mental health is really a community engagement that has to happen because it impacts all of us. So that's kind of like where we were. And Katrina mentioned, that the kids are addicted to technology. Um, you know, if they have to shut down their cell phone, it's like, oh, they don't have the skills like, withdrawal, I guess you would call it. But
Bye,
that's kind of,
Roland.
but that's where we were. That's where we were.
Thanks, Cam. In the spirit of time, we're looking to take a short break. Natalie, do we want to go ahead and jump into that now to give folks a moment?
I think that's a good idea. All right, it is 16 after, so I'm going to move us along so we can get through all the content. And so I'm going to skip pretty quickly through this next section. Priority issues to demonstrate your message. Basically, for DSC, especially since we're a coalition, we kind of we did a survey to get an assessment from members, like what are the main things that we should be focusing on. It basically is just, it is important for you to have that clarity. But you may already have that kind of like a list of priorities or like whatever your specific campaign demands were. So for us, we definitely did have to take that step. So we knew like what the focus was, but you may already know that. So I'm just going to kind of skip through that. In the workbook, it has all of this written out, just so you know, it's in there, but you may already have that or not need it for the work that you're doing. And so just to skip to the next section, measuring success and narrative change, and I'm going to pass it to Anel.
Yes. And so developing measurable metrics for success, right? How people talk about the issue, your media coverage, right? Engagement with with your content, right? Sharing comments, having attendance at events, those kind of things always gives you a strong indicator, right? If you're having success in developing your strong narratives, right? I think as you're kind of assessing some of those pieces, right? Having the internal alignment, if you're sharing your narrative and building it with uh, other folks that you're partnering with, staff, coalition members, so on and so forth, your partners in the communities, really going back to them, right? How are you feeling about this message? What is it looking like for you? How is it settling for you, right? And so we want to make sure that we all are on the same page, that without tracking, right, we won't know if our work is shifting beliefs, influencing decision makers, or aligning our communities, right? So really taking some measurable, like understanding to really measure your impact here with your narrative development is essential as well. So asking directly for member and ally feedback, right, is a good suggestion to get started in this area. Intentionally setting aside time in meetings to gather that feedback. Meetings that we have, we always kind of have a start and in the beginning, we always want to talk about the expectations, but then at the end of the meeting, we're always setting the expectation of giving feedback as well. Reflect as a group, what kind of reactions are we getting from folks, right? Reading the room, reading some body language as you're kind of sharing narratives, kind of seeing how folks are responding. And then also thinking about your media analysis, right? Seeing how you or others, a similar messaging is playing out in social media and traditional media. Having social media as a tool for us to be able to really share and blast narratives, seeing how many hits we're getting through that particular avenue is always a good idea. And so some do-it-yourself ways to gather data online, right? If you get technical assistance or work with a consultant, right? Those would be some good places that are low or no cost ways to gather info online. As AI continues to emerge, I think, some of us may have some different feelings around artificial intelligence and how to use that, right? However, it could be used as a very good tool to be able to kind of see where you're at in these kind of areas. Is how can you strengthen your messaging? But then just always want to caution us, right, to make sure that we're not just rolling with whatever it says, right? Like we have to kind of vet it through our own practices, our own expertise as well. Google Trends, Google Alerts, right? Always trying to match things up there. Social media scans, looking at the engagement data, how many hits am I getting, like I mentioned before. Simple searches by topics or hashtags, right? Kind of continuing that. Reddit, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, all the platforms, right? All the platforms. And so, as we kind of get ready to move towards closing here, we just want to really think about, we want to get some feedback. Do folks have any questions or other ideas for tracking narrative shifts, right? I think, viewing social media can definitely be a very strong tool. And then also curious if folks are having any other feelings or thoughts of how to track narrative shifts. I always can also think about surveying community members, right? How can we put out, community surveys to the community, get that feedback that way. You can always hold an event, panel discussions, town halls, those kind of things can always bring back some feedback as well. But anything else, any other ideas for tracking narrative shifts?
All the things that you said we have done in Kofi, and I'm trying to think of something that we haven't done. I would be open to hear other suggestions.
Possibly, I think the only, I think those are all very tangible things that we can do. Um, I think thinking of things outside of the box could always be an interesting idea. I wonder, if you're maybe you're generating newsletters, right? How many folks are reading the newsletters, right? Those kind of things. How are you also, sending things out to other, um, kind of getting feedback if you're working with volunteer base, right? Like how many volunteers do you have? What is their activity? Like those kind of things. Those could also be other opportunities to monitor, narrative shifts, but then also using your internal bases, right, to be able to tap into some of that too. Um, I think to Natalie's point early on, right, there's really no one way, one size fits all, and I think this is a space that we can also kind of think about some other tools creatively.
Can you
Anyone
guys
else?
see I started opening up a Google Trends search? Can you see that?
Yeah.
So I just to see like how it
Yes.
works. Um, so I just put in school to prison pipeline as a term. This is the past 24 hours. Something happened. probably at 6 a.m. Maybe a story was released. You could see the past month. It'll show you kind of like this is Google Trends. This is just people Googling it. Um, but I looked at this the other day and I noticed if you do it like since 2004, you can really see, oh, maybe did I do past 5 years? Since 2004, you can really see like the growth over time of people using this terminology. Maybe there was like a report release or something. Oh, that was the first Senate hearing on the school to prison pipeline was in 2012. I bet that's exactly what that was. So there was a big bump in people Googling what that was. Wow. I think that's what that was. Let's see, 2014, I think around then, that was when the Obama school discipline guidance was released. Like you can really see we could probably ourselves figure out like what these bumps are. In 2020, there was like a huge bump. I saw at least when I was looking at it the other day. So you can do this for other terms that you use in your work. It actually looks different than when I was looking at it the other day, and I'm wondering why. Maybe I used hyphens this time and didn't. So, this is AI functionally. So, it doesn't always give you the same results twice, but you can see that at least for things that are like about um like what people are actually Googling, you can look, well, these were the spikes of Google's of interest, throughout this last year. And we could probably figure out, something was released, something happened that translated to people being interested in finding that out. So I just wanted to share that, like specifically what Google Trends looks like, because it can be really interesting, and you can see like you can look literally like what are people trending, what are people Googling the most right now, which I'm not going to click because God only knows. So I'm going to pull up the slides again.
I was going to say something like hashtags or, some
Mhm.
other mechanism that you could track, but this is a really great one.
You absolutely can do hashtags. A few years ago, they were more useful. Now, because the
Yeah.
algorithms are so complex, like it won't it won't be as clear as it used to be when like where you'd see literally everything people were posting on that hashtag. Like those days are gone. Um, but we still have ways. And then Ruth, I'm not sure I can't see the chat right now, but we also shared another resource that comes from Reframe, which is an organization that does um, a lot of this type of narrative work, and they have a bunch of like more like tech solutions too, where there was one where you could like see the internet with like a right-wing algorithm applied to it versus like a more left wing. So you see like what comes up when you Google or what kinds of news sources come up first, things like that. It's really, that's how it is now. We don't really actually know what everybody else is seeing. It's like we are literally seeing a different internet. So they share tools to be able to understand that. So like kind of what all the complexity of what you're wading through in all of this. Um, so yeah, I think we're starting to wrap up. We just have 3 minutes left. So this is the third session out of four. So we only have one more left. Thank you there are a bunch of you who've been on all three. So thank you. And if you have folks who didn't join them, but you want to bring them in, next time we're going to be talking about combating opposition narratives. We've done some similar things on DSC Decodes calls. So that's always an important topic. So feel free to pull people in who haven't been on the others. I think we're also going to share the evaluation survey in the chat. So please give us feedback now on the next call as well. Just this is a new curriculum, a new style of things we're doing. So we definitely want to know how is it landing? And I'm always encouraging you to bring things to the next session. For this one, since we talked about audiences, It would be great if you could, if you happen to between now, as in, 2 weeks from now, if you see a media story or a social media post where you think they're kind of effectively speaking to an audience that you want to speak to, um, try to save the link to that. And you can share it in the chat, and like why you think they were successful. So, as we're consuming media, people are speaking directly to us sometimes, or they're speaking to somebody else. Sometimes you can like really tell, oh, they're really talking to this community in a way. I think that community will listen. So just keep an eye out for that. And if you are able to share some examples of that, that would be great. We can learn from other people who are successful at communicating with different audiences. And we will ask for a volunteer to share. And that's it. Thank you to Anel, my co-facilitator, and Ruth for sharing all of the resources in the chat. And the worksheet that we shared, definitely use that if it's useful to you to like, answer all the questions and fully fill it in. We knew, there wasn't enough time for you to spend on that, just in those like 10-15 minutes, but hopefully it is useful. And we're going to add that to the workbook. But thank you so much and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank
Peace,
you
everyone.
all.
Yeah.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
one.
Thank you, Anel. Thank you, Natalie.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you for being here.